Welcome to Aitereya Upanishad study and discussion. Today's verses 3.11 to 14 explain the descent of consciousness into his creation, the human beings, and the moment of self-realization. In the next slide, we have mentioned the references used to prepare this presentation. Some slides have the reference materials as it is to keep the meaning as it is. We want to disclose it is for learning purpose only. In the next slide, we have mentioned some choices of questions for discussion. 1. Why does Brahman ask Ka Aham, who am I, when deciding to enter the body? 2. Upon entering the body, the Creator realizes that everything is Brahman. Then, why does the Jivatma, the embodied soul, forget its true nature? 3. If the three states, the waking, sleeping, deep sleep or dwellings, who is the dweller that moves between these states? How can one remain awake while the body and mind are in these three states of sleep? 4. Why would the Devatas, the gods, or the Supreme Truth prefer indirect names, Paroksha? Why can't the ultimate truth be named directly? Now, the summary from the last few sessions. The Aitereya Upanishad explains creation and the creator behind it. It details how the universe emerged from a single conscious source, the singularity. So, in the beginning, there was only the Supreme Self, the Brahman. There was no movement, no time, and no other being, described as nothing else. Then, creation began through the divine will. First, Brahman manifests the four worlds by their elemental nature. After establishing the worlds, he created the firstborn, the Hiranyagarbha, the golden embryo. This golden embryo, hatching like an egg, burst open to reveal the organs of senses, their actions, and their corresponding deities. So, as seen in the illustration on the right, the verses explain and connects the mouth and speech to the fire deity, nostrils and smell to the air, sight and eyes to the sun, ears and hearing to the space, skin and touch with the nature, heart and mind to the moon, navel and excretion to death, the generative organs and reproduction to water. Thus, from the cosmic egg, the Hiranyagarbha, the Creator manifested the first sentient human-like form, the cosmic person or Purusha, the Virat, the manifest world. Then the verse describes the descent of cosmic powers, the Agni, Vayu, Surya, Chandra, etc., into human form and explain the interdependency between the microcosm, the human being, and the macrocosm, the universe. By making hunger and thirst partners with every deity, the text explains the root of human desire. Then the Creator manifested the food, the solid matter. Though all the senses mentioned above can have knowledge of the solid food in their own way, only Apanavayu has the capacity to grasp, assimilate, and convert it to energy. So now, today's verses. The following verses describe the final stage of creation. So, the Creator realizes that a body without a soul is like a house without an owner. These verses describe the homecoming of consciousness, the enlightenment, the self-realization, the aha moment. With this, Ranjini will add and take us to the verses.
Thank you, Val.
Thank you.
So this graphic on the right is a really good summary of what Val just talked through, the process of Srishti or creation as it's laid out in the Aitereya Upanishad. So as you remember, it starts with a single source of energy or consciousness, Brahman, who with intense will or tapas, he brooded upon, he generated an intense amount of heat with the tapas, and from that arose the four worlds. And from the four worlds, he then created Hiranyagarbha, or the cosmic egg. So the first person, the Purusha or Virat, is created, and then the individual souls. So if you remember, we talked about all the different organs that were formed. So for now, you've got different organs, the Indriyas, capable of different functions. So you've got the Jnanendriyas and the Karmendriyas. And then this verse says, Sa ikshata katham no idam madrite syat iti sa ikshate katarena prapatyay iti. Sa, so Saha in this case is the Atman, the creator. Ikshata, he thought. Katham no, how indeed, idam, this body and its functions, mad rite, without me, syat, could exist. Iti, thus, sa, he, ikshata, he thought. Katarena, by which way, prapatye, shall I enter, iti. So just that first part, the creator thought, I've created all these different organs capable of speech, but how are they going to exist without me? So he wonders, by which way shall I enter these organs? Sa ikshata. Yadi vacha abhivyaritam, yadi pranena abhipranitam, yadi chakshusha drishtam, yadi shrotrena shrutam, yadi tvacha sprishtam, yadi manasa dhyatam, yadi apanena abhyapanitam, yadi shishnena visrishtam, atha kah aham iti, ko aham iti or kah aham iti. So yadi vacha abhivyahritam. So if by speech is the spoken word, yadi pranena abhipranitam. If by breath it is breathed, or through the nostrils, you breathe. Yadi chakshusha drishtam. If by the eye it is seen, it is the manifest world. Yadi shrotrena shrutam. If by the ear it is heard. Yadi tvacha sprishtam. If by the skin it is touched. Yadi manasa dhyatam. If by the mind it is thought. Yadi apanena abhyapanitam. If by the apanavayu it is swallowed or assimilated, the food. Yadi shishnena visrishtam. If with the reproductive or the procreative organs, we talk about the semen being emitted, atha, then, ko aham iti, kaha, who am I in this? So he's looking at all these various disembodied organs, maybe even they've come together in a human form, and he says, who are they without me? By which way shall I enter? So he again thought, if speaking be done by speech, smelling by the nose, seeing by the eyes, hearing by the ears, touching by the skin, thinking by the mind, eating by the apanavayu or the peristaltic movements, and continuity by the generative organ, then who am I? So this has been described as one of probably the most profound questions because it starts to bring in that self-awareness of who am I? And then earlier in the Vedas, it is mentioned that for your context, that prana enters the human body through the soles of the feet. Now it is the creator talking about how he is going to enter the human body, and he in this case being consciousness. So this is now talking about the descent of consciousness. Sage Mahidasa Aitereya from a humble community, being from a humble community, the language he uses in these verses is grounded, accessible, and even understood by a common man. So when trying to explain this descent of consciousness, where the infinite creator contemplates the hardware of the human body. So you've got all the physical organs and you've got its capabilities. But he says, how do I make this being sentient? How should I enter this? So this leads to the ultimate existential inquiry, ko aham, kaha aham, who am I? And by asking this question and placing it here, remember Mahidasa is trying to raise out interest in his students. You can read this question at multiple levels, right? First of all, it's a meditative tool that strips away our identification with the biological functions, seeing, hearing, breathing, thinking. So the minute the consciousness comes to the body, it starts to identify with the body and it starts to be constrained by the body. And so Brahman is thinking, if I enter this and all these systems, these organs are performing all these functions, what's my role? Who am I? By realizing that we're not the participants in these actions, but the Sakshi Chaitanya, the witness consciousness that illuminates them, we move from a state of struggle, identifying with our sense organs, to a state of peace in our realization of our own consciousness as our real identity. Okay, so 2 layers here. At the first layer, Brahman is thinking to himself, who am I? In this mix over here, in this configuration of organs with their functions, who am I? And the teacher, Mahidasa, is trying to get his students to think beyond their identification with their senses and the body to say, who are you? Who is the real you? So the verse concludes that this inner I is an overspreading wonder, identical to the supreme Brahman that created the stars, revealing that the indweller of the individual is the same as the indweller of the entire universe, thus explaining the non-duality or the oneness. Okay? So it feels a little odd to have Brahman ask this question, ko aham, who am I? Let's go further and see what the next verse says about this. Sa etam eva simanam vidarya etaya dvara prapadyata. Sa isha vidriti nama dvatat etat nandanam. Tasya traya avastha traya swapnaha. Ayam avasataha, ayam avasataha, ayam avasataha. Saha, he the self, etam eva, this very simanam. Simanam is the like a seam or the suture in the crown of the head. Vidarya, having pierced. Etaya dwara, by that door, prapadyata, entered. Sa esha, that very opening, vidriti nama, it is called the vidriti, or in yogic parlance, it's called the Brahmarandra. Dwa is the door, and vidriti is the cleft. Tat etat nandanam, this is the place of bliss. Tasya, for him, traya avasataha, there are 3 abodes or residences. Traya swapna, 3 states of sleep. Ayam avasataha, ayam avasataha, ayam avasataha. Repeated 3 times to indicate the locations. Okay? So if you put the meaning together, it says, then he split open the suture on the skull and entered by that door. So entering through the top of the head. This is the door that they call vidriti, or the cleft. It's also associated as the place of bliss. Now, many layers to unpack here. And it says, once he enters the body, there are 3 dwelling places and there are 3 conditions of sleep. So they, in a very terse way, as you can see, most of these mantras are quite terse. It says there are 3 abodes or 3 places where this consciousness then resides. And it says, and there are 3 conditions of sleep. So many of us have learned, right, what these 3 conditions of sleep are. And then it just says, this is the first dwelling, this is the second dwelling, this is the third dwelling. Now, Shankara interprets these 3 abodes of the Atman as the right eye in the waking state. So the 3 states of sleep are waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, right? So Shankara says, in the waking state, it's the right eye. In the dream state, it's the throat and the heart in deep sleep. So you can imagine the teacher when it just says, Ayam avasataha, just pointing, perhaps to different parts of his body. It's left to our imagination. But this is the actual Sanskrit translation of what this verse says. And then you see lots of interpretations. Let's consider some of them. So the entry of the self, Brahman. So Brahman is all around. He's created this macrocosm. Now he's entering the human jiva as the Atman. So the verse describes the supreme self entering the human form to experience its creation. After the physical body was perfected, remember Sukrita and the sensory guardians were in place, the creator entered the human vessel through the crown of the head or the Vidriti. Vidriti corresponds with the sagittal suture or the bregma, the soft spot on the infant's head. In Vedic thought, this is the most refined energetic gateway. While the senses enter through the lower gates, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, prana through the soles, the owner or the consciousness enters through the highest point or the crown. So this is very interesting. Of course, it led me to question, with so many of you are doctors in this group, the role that the sagittal suture and the bregma especially is that soft spot where both if you think about a line through the top of your head and then on the other axis, it's a soft spot where the two meet. And during birth, it is soft. It allows the bones to slide together. The baby comes through, and then it closes up probably in the first year to a year and a half. And the highest point in the skull. That's also supposed to be the seat of the Sahasra Chakra. So this is one of the first indications. And think about the biological specificity of what is being described over here. And I'd love to hear afterwards from some of you about how this might correlate, because I did my own searches and I couldn't find, definitive, although there's a lot of, comparisons. So I'd love to hear from you on that. All right. So we've talked about how it enters through the bregma. Once inside, the verse tells you that the self resides in 3 primary locations, manifesting as 3 states of consciousness. As I just said, waking, it resides in the right eye or the senses. Dreaming is in the mind. And deep sleep is in the heart. So conclusion, the verse concludes that as long as the self identifies only with these states, it is essentially in a dream state, waiting for the moment of awakening to its true nature. So what just happened? You've got this consciousness, you've got this energy that has just created this entire microcosm that is now starting to manifest a world, and then says, I need to enter this human. I need to enter these living beings I've created because they need something the eye can see, the ears can hear. Back to Kena Upanishad. What is that causes the eye to see or the ears to hear? Just because it has a function doesn't mean it is actually functioning unless there's some kind of a central coordinator. When that central coordinator consciousness enters the human body, what happens? It starts to be defined by the human body, right? It starts to identify with the senses. It is now limited, which helps you now go back and understand the question that he asked in the first verse, which is, Ko aham, who am I? I am now inside this body. But the Brahmin still hasn't forgotten. So let's go to the next verse. Sajato bhutani abhivyakyat kim iha anyam vavadishat iti sa etam eva purusham brahma tatatamam apashyat idam adrisham iti. Sajatah. So having been born or having entered, bhutani, all the living beings, abhivyakyat, he just looked around. Kim iha anyam, what is here other than me? These are all things that I've created. Vavadishat, to be spoken of thus. He says, they're all a part of me. What is there to be described here? Sahahi etam eva, this very purusham, person, the individual cosmic person, Brahma tatamam, as Brahman, apashyat. saw and realized, idam adrisham, I have seen this. So having been born, entering the body, he gazed around upon all the creatures and said, what is there other than me that needs to be named? They're all a part of me. Now it's from unity to a plurality, there's a fragmentation. And he says, it's all me. He saw this Purusha, the Supreme Brahman. He saw this overspreading wonder and he said to himself, oh, I have seen this before. So just one note. I'll forward you the website. It's called Gaye Sanskrit. And there's a beautiful chanting of particularly the Aitereya Upanishad. So, idam adrisham iti. That iti in the chant is elongated. Idam adrisham iti. When you listen to the chanting, you will hear the elongated iti. It is, to say it is elongated to 3 mantras following the Vedic rule concerning words that refer to Brahman or suggesting liberation. Okay? So, idam adrisham iti. So it's a moment of it. It's a moment of wonder that Brahman now looks around and he says, oh, I've seen this before. So the moment of awakening, what is there other than me? The process of realization. Entering the body, the self looks through the senses, initially seeing diversity. The eyes see a different form, the ears hear a different sound. He starts seeing this diversity. And upon deeper reflection, it recognizes that there is nothing separate from itself. Excuse me, the individual person and the universal Brahman are one. Now, this, I have to qualify, is the Advaita perspective on it. And as we have talked many times, there are at least 2 other perspectives, the Visishta Advaita and the Dvaita. They might have a slightly different interpretation of this, but for the purposes of this, since we've been following Swami Guru Bhaktananda, Swami Chinmayananda, and primarily the Advaitins, we say universal person and the universal Brahman are one. So what's the divine insight? The turning point, realizing that the created world, the sun, the moon, the elements, food, are but reflections of the self. And when he says, I have seen this before, it's like, I have seen the truth. From confusion to absolute clarity, the joyous exclamation, not just of Brahman or of the seer, the one whose consciousness, through his own tapas, this individual Jivatma who now realizes that he is the same energy, part of that same energy that pervades the rest of the universe, and says there is no difference between you and me, the tree, the rock. We are all part of the same consciousness and we're connected. So that moment of realization, that moment of joy and wonder is what this verse is trying to create in the Brahman's realization. That, yeah, it's fragmented. I've created all these things, but at the end of the day, it's a part of me. Tasmat idandro name dandro havai nama. Tasmat idandra nama idandra havai nama. Tam idandram santam indra iti achakshate parokshena. Parokshapriya iva hi deva, parokshapriya iva hi devaha. Tasmat, therefore, idandra means the beholder or the witness. Idam indraha, the beholder of this manifest world. Nama, he is named. Idandra havai nama. Idandra indeed is his name. Tam idandram santam, 3rd time, him being Idandra or the witness to this manifest world, Indraha iti achakshate. They call him Indra, not Idandra. He becomes Indra. Parokshena, indirectly or cryptically through a veil. Paroksha priyaha, these lovers of the indirect. Ivahi devaha, these gods are indeed. They love that mystery. They love the indirect. They love that veil. And he says it, and they say it twice. Paroksha priya iva hi devaha, paroksha priya iva hi devaha. Excuse me. So it says, therefore, he's called Idandra. Idandra verily is his name. This Idandra has since been called as Indra. This is his indirect or his nickname. Excuse me. Devas are fond of indirect names. Indeed, they're fond of indirect names. Val, would you like to take us to the next one?
Sure, Ranjini. So, since the Idantra name is so stressed here, we want to expand this. So, the preference for the indirect names, paroksha, when we give something a direct name, like the infinite, our brain says, okay, I know what it is. And then it stops looking or thinking. By using an indirect name, the mind is forced to keep looking deeper because the name doesn't immediately make sense. So in the verse, the name Indra comes from Idamtra, meaning I saw this. If the verse just said God entered the body, we might nod and forget it. But by using a nickname like Indra, it forces us to ask, why that name? What did he see? This effort to unpack the meaning is like a mental workout leading to the aha moment. So in the Upanishads, the aha moment is the goal of the teacher. They don't want to give you the map, like map you see, but they want to force you to look at the landscape until you recognize where you are, like as described in the illustration on the right. So protecting the wonder, direct names make things feel ordinary. If you describe a beautiful sunset using only scientific wavelengths of light, you lose the wonder. Indirect names act like a veil. So they remind us that the truth is much bigger than our language. It keeps the mystery alive, which keeps our hearts and minds open. So,
Thank you, Val.
thank you.
Done with my coughing fit. Hopefully, So a little bit more to add to this concept of the paroksha. Paroksha can be viewed as Maya or the veil, right? So see what happens. The minute consciousness enters the human body, it starts to identify with the senses and it starts to think that everything that is being perceived by the senses is real. Now, we know that that is not real because it is the consciousness within. It's a singular consciousness, but now you're seeing a plurality or a multiplicity outside. So why does this guru, or why does Brahma or Brahman, who's called Idandra, when he's shortened to Indra, it's already a play of this Maya, right? That we use a proxy instead of the real thing because the real Brahman is too vast a concept for the Jivatma to comprehend right away. So the Jivatma starts to forget. But also from a teaching perspective, there is a difference between just being fed information, which remains at the information level, and self-reflection and a search or self-inquiry that leads to realization, which is much more long-lasting. So all of us are reading the Upanishads, we're studying them, right? But a lot of it is still just at the information level. None of us have had that anubhuti. We have not had that, I'm generalizing, may not have had that experience. So it goes from paroksha jnana to aparoksha anubhuti. So paroksha, proxy, knowledge is only a proxy for the real thing. I can describe something, but I cannot know it the way I would if I've actually experienced it. So you can describe an elephant to a child who's never seen an elephant, and it has a mental image of it, but it's not the same experience of having seen an elephant, right? So paroksha jnana, it is just not even jnana, it is information. To aparoksha anubhuti, through experience, it becomes very real. So that's, again, a lot of these concepts are subject to multiple levels of interpretation and commentaries. But the very first one is to understand that the minute it enters the body, it starts to become subject to the limitations of this human body. It starts to forget itself, the jiva, the atma. It starts to identify with the senses. And now it seeks. It could get lost in the attraction of the senses and all the wonderful things that the manifest world serves up. Or it could go back inwards and discover what has always been there, its own true nature. But that is a process of realization. It cannot be told. It has to be worked for and experienced. So in summary, the verses illustrate that the human body is a temple designed for the divine to experience itself. The senses do the work, but the Atman is the silent observer that gives the entire mechanism meaning. The wonder described at the end is the moment of enlightenment, where the seeker realizes that the God they were looking for is the very witnessing consciousness within them. So in the three states of sleep, whether you're waking, dreaming, or deep sleep, there is something within you that is awake, that is experiencing all those three states. What is it? Right? This witnessing consciousness, this Atma. And as always, Ashokan has given us a very helpful summary table. So just to go back, Katham anvidam madrate syat. How can this exist without me? What's the literal meaning? The self questions its role. The philosophical role is functions alone cannot explain consciousness. So, it's a really interesting thing to think about neuroscience and how neuroscience understands consciousness and how it's laid out in the Upanishads. So the flow stage is self-inquiry. Katarena prapadhye. By how shall I enter? The literal meaning is a search for entry. Philosophical meaning, consciousness seeks embodiment. Yadi vacha, then it goes on through, yadi vacha, yadi manasa. So if the speech speaks, the mind thinks, it's an examination of the faculties and the realization that the organs are not the self. So it's this na iti na neti 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 process. Atha ko ahamiti, who am I? Identity inquiry, birth of Vedantic self-inquiry. So Brahman asking, ko aham, who am I? Is what all of Vedanta is structured behind, is this question that we all need to be asking ourselves. Vidrati, the sacred opening. Consciousness enters through it and creates a nandanam, a place of bliss. Simanam vidarya, enters through the crown. Consciousness enters individuality. Dwara prapadhyat, activation. Body becomes conscious. That becomes the dwara. The dwar is the door. Vidrati, the cleft, the fissure. Brahmarandra symbolism, right? The sacred embodiment. Consciousness enters. Consciousness is also supposed to leave from here. Nandanam, it's a place of bliss. Joyous entry. Awareness transforms life. So it's a beautiful description of consciousness. Pure consciousness is ananda. We've seen that in the earlier chapters. Nandanam, the place of bliss, where bliss is experienced, is also there. Traya avasataha, three dwelling places. Beginning of consciousness. And we've seen in the Mandukya Upanishad the description of the three states of consciousness. Okay. Bhutani abhivyakyat. The key question is, he examined all beings. The self surveys creation. Awareness recognizes itself everywhere. Kim ihanyam, what else is here? Multiplicity starts to dissolve. So it starts off establishing this is all one. Purusham Brahma. Purusha is Brahman, identity realization, the cosmic person recognized as the absolute. Tattamam, all pervading. Brahman is everywhere. Embodiment does not limit consciousness. When we forget, we believe our consciousness is limited to this physical body of ours. Idam adarsham, I have seen this. Recognition, remembrance, truth discovered. And you can imagine that this is what seers and seekers experience, is when they see the Atman, it is so familiar. When Brahman says, I have seen this before, it's like going back home. The awakening is a process of going back to something that is so deeply familiar and that's always been there, but lost to our day-to-day reality and the limitations of our ego and our senses and intellect. Then this other question about how Idandra becomes Indra, leading to paroksha or indirectness. The message is that the Vedic deities are symbolic veils over deeper consciousness principles. Through symbols, myths, names, metaphors, and ritual language is how we approach them. Idandraha, the one who saw this. Consciousness is symbolized. Indraha, indirect form. It's a symbolic contraction. Truth concealed in a divine name. Parokshena, indirectly. Vedic language hides deeper truths. Paroksha priyaha. The gods are described as paroksha priya. They love these riddles and this indirect references, symbols, proxies for the real truth. Myth becomes metaphysics. So just a very quick summary of the 4 verses that we talked about today. Let's come back to the questions that we started this with. And these questions, again, are just meant to spark the conversation. So at the beginning, it's to tee up what you should be listening for. And at the end, to say, let's go back to this and say, what do we think about these now that we've listened to these 4 verses? Why does Brahman ask, Ko aham? Who am I? When deciding to enter the body. Upon entering the body, the creator realizes that everything is Brahman. Why then does the Jivatma forget its true nature? If the 3 states are dwellings, who is the dweller that moves between them? How can one remain awake while the body and mind are in these 3 states of sleep? So, by inference, even the awake state, we're walking through it like a dream. We're walking through Maya. And the 4th question, why would the devas, the gods, or the supreme truth prefer indirect names, the paroksha? Why can't the ultimate truth be named directly? Now, I've shared with you a little bit of synthesis from what different commentators have said, but it's open to interpretation, right? If the Brahman was in us, and he's the Idandra, the witness, why was his name changed to Indra, who is now just a proxy, a god, a proxy for that divine consciousness? Okay, so I'll let you read those questions, and then I'll stop recording and open it up to conversation.